Ever get that feeling, when you're at the store and you hit that gluten-free aisle?
Yeah.
Like suddenly the rules of grocery shopping don't apply
Oh,
anymore.
totally.
Everything's like twice the price or more. We're talking about gluten-free bread.
Oh, yeah.
So today we're doing a deep dive into why exactly this is. And believe me, it's about way more than just swapping out some wheat flour.
Right. It's a lot more complex than people realize. Like, there's this whole hidden cost that goes way beyond the ingredients themselves.
Okay, so before we get into that, let's talk numbers. Because the Gluten-Free Podcast blog, which we're looking at today, does not mess around with the stats.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. Gluten-free bread, ready for this,
Okay.
can be more than 4 times the price of regular bread. I know.
Yeah.
That's not just a little markup. That is a whole other stratosphere of grocery budgeting.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it's not just bread, right? Like across the board.
Yeah, they found that on average, gluten-free foods are 159% more expensive.
Oh.
Yeah. Just imagine you're at, say, Kohl's, just for an example.
Right.
And you see a regular loaf of bread for like $2.40. And then, bam, the gluten-free option is at least $5.70.
It adds up.
Oh, yeah. Especially for those who need to buy it week after week.
Exactly. So it's more than just like, oh, I just prefer this kind of bread. This actually impacts people's lives in a real way.
It does.
But let's back up for a second and break down exactly what goes into these costs.
Right.
So obviously ingredients, that's a no-brainer, right? But tell me more about that because it's not as simple as it seems.
It's not. See, those gluten-free alternatives, those rice flours, tapioca flours, almond flours, whatever it is, they're inherently just more expensive to produce in the first place.
So the sourcing is a big factor here then.
Yeah, it's not like wheat, which is,
Everywhere.
yeah. They often need these special farming practices, and then often the yields end up being lower than traditional wheat.
Right, so it's like comparing like apples and oranges or like grabbing a bag of flour at the store versus like sourcing some rare fruit from,
Absolutely.
the Himalayas or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then on top of that, you got to think about it. A lot of these ingredients, they're often shipped from farther away.
Oh, so that adds to the cost.
Yeah, transportation costs go up. Then there's the whole processing side of it.
Hmm.
Think about it this way. You got your small little bakery versus this huge, factory
Right.
producing regular bread. Gluten-free often happens on a smaller scale,
Yeah.
which means that the cost per unit is just naturally going to be higher.
Right, because they don't have those economies of scale.
Exactly.
It's like those small places, you find them tucked away somewhere. They've got amazing stuff, but they can't just churn it out like those big factories. So
Right, exactly.
you got to charge a premium for it. Okay, but it's not just the scale of things, right? Because with gluten-free, there's this whole other layer of complication. We're talking about cross-contamination.
Absolutely. And that is huge for people with celiac.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's not a joke. Even the tiniest little bit of gluten can really mess them up. So manufacturers, they have to be so careful to make sure there's absolutely none of that in there.
So it's not like you can just toss in some different flour and call it a day, huh?
No, not at all. We're talking about completely separate facilities,
Wow.
special equipment,
Okay.
constant testing.
Yeah.
Every single step along the way has to be totally gluten-free.
Which adds to the cost, I'm assuming.
Oh, big time. It's a huge part of it.
Yeah. Just thinking about having to make sure that not a single crumb gets in anywhere.
Exactly.
That takes a lot of effort. A lot of people probably don't even think about that.
Yeah, and then there's the whole challenge of making it taste good, right?
Yeah.
Because gluten, as much as we talk about it, it does a lot.
It does.
Think about the texture of bread, that chewiness, or a good croissant, all airy.
Yeah.
That's the gluten doing its thing.
Yeah.
And recreating that without it, well, it's tricky.
It's like its own science.
It really is.
Yeah.
You often need all these different flours, starches, things to bind it together.
Right.
Which, of course, adds to the cost again.
And I'm guessing there's a lot of trial and error in that too, huh?
Oh, yeah. You don't get it right on the first try.
Because even at home, baking gluten-free, it is a labor of love, let me tell you.
It is. It is. And once you've finally nailed that perfect taste and texture, then you got to check it.
Oh, right.
Quality control for every single batch. Make sure it meets all those gluten-free standards.
So just to recap, because we've got, the ingredients themselves are expensive, smaller batches,
Right.
all those precautions to keep things separate, and then the whole R&D of it, basically, of making it taste good.
Right.
What am I missing?
Okay, so you also got to consider that the gluten-free market's still kind of new compared to the big established,
Right.
the regular gluten world. So you have fewer companies making these products, which means
Less competition.
exactly, which
Yeah.
can mean higher prices.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's like those designer handbags, right? They
Yeah,
can charge a fortune because everyone wants one and there aren't enough.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then to top it all off, there's the added cost of getting it from the factory to the store shelf. Because again, you're talking about smaller shipments. You got to have distributors who understand the whole gluten-free thing.
Right.
And you have to be careful with handling all of that so nothing gets contaminated along the way.
So really, it's like this whole
Yeah.
chain of events. It's a system.
Yeah. That all just pushes that price up.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right? We think about it so simply like, oh, gluten-free is just more expensive. But it's this whole, like you said, it's a whole web of things.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the end of the day, it's not just about numbers and spreadsheets and profit margins.
No, it's not.
We're talking about real people here and their everyday lives.
That's right. And our source actually talked about that impact.
Hmm.
They said that 7 in 10 people who buy gluten-free actually say it really affects their quality of life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just imagine that stress, like every time you're at the grocery store, you're having to choose between your health and your budget.
It's a real dilemma.
It is. And honestly, it makes you realize this isn't just like, oh, I prefer this type of bread. This is like fundamental to people
Yeah.
living their lives.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Being able to,
Yeah.
enjoy food and not have to worry about getting sick.
Exactly. Exactly. And the financial part of it, that's huge.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, they said almost 80% of people struggle to afford gluten-free food.
80%.
That's huge.
That's the vast majority.
It is. And, some people are even forced to just eat gluten, even though they know it's not good for them, because what are they going to do?
It's just not accessible.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be like that.
It shouldn't.
So, I mean, where do we go from here? What's the future hold? Is there any hope for all this to change?
There is. There is some good news here. The gluten-free market, get this, it's booming.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Like in the UK, the free-from market, which includes gluten-free, has grown by 133% in just 5 years.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
a huge jump.
That's enormous.
Yeah.
That tells us more and more people are choosing or needing to avoid gluten. And that demand could actually end up changing everything.
So more people on board means maybe the price will go down?
It's possible. It's
Yeah.
like anything else. The more people are into it,
Right.
the more you're going to see, more companies.
More competition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And maybe they'll figure out better ways to make it.
Right, because they have to then.
They do. Lower costs. Maybe the government even steps in. Who knows? It's possible.
It's like anything, right? Something gets popular enough, and then the industry kind of has to respond.
Exactly. Exactly. But for the time being, it's still, there's still that premium
Yeah.
that comes with going gluten-free.
So as we wrap up here, I mean, thinking about what we've talked about today, everything that goes into it, all the costs, the
Yeah.
impact on people, the health aspects, I mean, I guess it really boils down to that question, doesn't it? How much is a gluten-free lifestyle worth?
It really does.
Yeah.
That's the question, isn't it?
And it's not an easy one to answer, that's for sure. But hopefully, after this deep dive, the next time you're strolling down that gluten-free aisle and you see those prices, you'll have a little bit more understanding
for sure.
of what goes into it.
Absolutely.
And maybe a little bit more empathy, too, for the folks who rely on these foods every single day.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that's it for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone, and catch you next time.